Yeah, so I'm delighted to be here with you, at least virtually. My name is Elizabeth Dyck, and I run the Organic Growers Research and Information Sharing Network, better known as OGRIN. And I've been working with NOFA-NJ New Jersey now for, I think pretty intensively for the past 3 years or so. And I must say, it's just been a wonderful organization to work with. I really appreciate all the enthusiasm and technical expertise they bring to webinars like this and to partnering on this NE SARE grant we've been working on value-added grains. So this is a webinar on planting value-added grains, specifically devoted to New Jersey conditions. And what I'm going to do is just we have a wonderful video that's been shot by NOFA New Jersey, Tony Kinnett. And so I'm going to introduce the video. It takes about 15 minutes, and then I'll come back in and bore you with a few slides, and then we'll have a bit of time for discussion. So before we start the video, I just wanted to get us all on the same page. What do I mean by a value-added grain crop? That's a small grain crop or a pseudo-cereal. Pseudo-cereals are things like buckwheat, amaranth, flax, that is grown or processed for high market value, usually as food. So we're not talking about crops as cover crops. We're talking about them as cash crops. But I just wanted to let you see high market value, because right now in New Jersey, even in my very poor county in upstate New York, it's the second poorest in the state, we can sell these grains for good prices. So if you look at this little estimated list, I've been helping farmers sell their grains now for over 10 years. And I work with a lot of mills and other processing venues. So I have a pretty good bird's eye view of the prices. And you can see that milling grain, I'm just using wheat here, especially if it's organic, it doesn't necessarily have to be certified organic, but organically managed. You can see you can get really good prices. So a conventional price for modern wheat would maybe be somewhere down around 15 to 20 cents a pound. Heirloom brings the price up even more, and any of the ancient wheats brings the price up a great deal. So you can easily get $1 a pound for something like organic einkorn wholesale. Retail, the sky's the limit. Berries, flour, and rolled oats sell for between $2 and $7 a pound, and I'll just prove that to you because I've been doing some market testing again in my tiny count, my very low population, very poor county. We're selling buckwheat at $4 a pound retail. We're selling einkorn flour at $3.75 a pound, which is really cheap. And we're selling spelt berries, which can be made as a rice substitute, for about $2.10 a pound. Now, this is in my county. In your markets in New Jersey, those prices would be at least 1.5 times higher. So it's really this a good opportunity for growers to grow really good crops that are good for your soil and will also give you a good profit. So I'll just mention these are the topics that are going to be covered in the video or here, usually in both. So just be sure to take some notes because you're going to hear right from the farmers now, right from 3 New Jersey farmers about sourcing seed, rotation, fertilization and liming, seedbed prep and the equipment needed to do it, a little bit on weed considerations, planting methods and equipment needed, the planting calendar, and buying used equipment. So I think we're ready to go.
Great.
I'll stop share.
Okay, so Josefina, do you want to take over from here?
Sure thing. I'm going to be sharing my screen, everyone. So just if you could give me a thumbs up when you're able to see it.
Got it.
All right, great. Now I'm going to start playing and we should be good. And just let me know again.
Hey, everybody. Scott Morgan here from Organics Family Farm. We're out here on a beautiful March afternoon. getting some oat seed in the ground. Tom Zhang, Zhang Family Farm. Spring day, just a day or two after the equinox, perfect time to plant oats. We've got real nice soil moisture. It's been dry enough to get the soil worked up, get a real beautiful seed bed, and we've got rain coming in the next couple of days. So we'll see when Tom gets back closer to us. He's out pulling his seed drill. He's got it's a bit of a misnomer. It doesn't drill holes per se, but it drags lines in the soil, and it uses what's called a double disc opener. It cuts grooves to a depth that you've set on the adjustments of your machine, and into those grooves, it's actively dropping a nice calibrated dribble of seed to match your seed rate needs. I think he's probably putting in somewhere between 100 and 120 pounds to the acre right now. Let's see, if we come down here to the ground, you can kind of make out that about every 7 inches, there's a clear disturbance in the soil. In this line, you can see right here, there's a nice example of that seed that's just dribbled out. And that's what it's doing. It's a steadier stream of seed than you can see easily, just because every time I disturb the soil, I'm burying more of the seed. But that machine's going to do a real nice job, create a real uniform stand. And oats are so vigorous that he probably won't even cultivate this field again. You can see there's really, he killed the weeds that were here with a little bit of light tillage that he's already done. And oats grow so vigorously that they'll outcompete everything else that might be in this field. So we might want to head over that way and catch Tom as he's on his way back in. The wind is bad. He's making his turn. He'll set those hydraulics in just a second, and you'll see those. They all set back down just then. Now it's digging the lines and planting the seed. He's running what is probably a 12-foot drill. So about 20 lines of seed going in it all at the same time. Behind us, I'm looking at his son Isaac planting a different variety of oats with a machine 3 times that size, probably running about 30 foot at a single pass. Springtime routine to get ready for oats.
Spring for oats is get the manure applied on the land as soon as you can. February was out because it was snowy. January wasn't too bad, but limited. So most of this ground we got done recently. So do that and then disc it down, then go over with field cultivator, and then plant. So as few passes as possible to save your own time, diesel. Well, save time, diesel, but fewer passes has always, to me, meant better soil care.
Yeah.
The more apt to go over it. It looks nice, feels nice, but I'm not sure it's the right thing. Right, the winter weeds is the reason for, especially with organics, for tilling. I don't, even in my conventional ground, I don't no-till any small grain. But I take that back. Yes, I do. After soybeans, I'll no-till small grains in.
Okay.
Did not do that with any organic ground. No, it wouldn't make sense. I wouldn't. No.
Yeah, but those winter weeds that germinated last fall have got a pretty good foothold. If you
they did.
If you don't
you gotta till them.
hit them with tillage.
It's important. Yep.
Yeah.
So they came on.
Yeah, and I bet if we did a biological assay, even though you're doing some tillage, it's still some very healthy soil. It's still I can see by looking at it that it's got really great aggregation. I mean, that's really nice soil holding together with old roots still in there, and yet it's been tilled.
Oh, tillage is important. I don't know how you get away from tillage if you are organic for very long.
Yeah. One of the key things with oats is timing, right? I mean, we're out here 3 days after the equinox.
It's not early.
It's not early. You want to get oats in as early as possible. I always like to try and get them in by the 21st. But
I like to try to be ready. My goal is to be ready by the 1st of March.
Yeah.
Because when it changes, you got to hurry up and get it in because it'll change back.
Yeah, if that window opens, you only need a couple of days and get out and get that seed in the ground. Because if you get out, honestly, much past now, you get out into early April and the likelihood anymore of it getting too hot.
It sometimes, yeah, that's right. Sometimes, and yet I have planted oats actually into very beginning of May, first couple days, and they turned out all right. But then I have, like you said, planted oats the beginning of April. They were junk. But every year is different.
Right.
You never know. You just don't know.
But your average is to get in nice and early, and the oats like to grow in the cooler season of
That's
spring,
right.
get that flowering period
That's right.
before it gets too hot outside.
That's the hope.
And generally, that's going to afford you a good strong crop.
Yeah, that's right. That's what you shoot for. That's good practice. And you just hope the weather cooperates so you can plant. And many times it doesn't, but many times it does. So you gotta be ready.
A lot of times I'm growing seeds that are either recommended by the person that I'm going to sell them to, or somebody else that I know that grows it. Yeah. In the case of these, right now Tom's planting hulless oat variety called Gale. So the hulless oats are a great bit of plant breeding that allows us to go straight from harvest to, or straighter from harvest to saleable product.
And the smaller equipment on a little smaller acreage and hit the local market for fertilizer.
You got that manure in the ground, and oats they're not the heaviest feeder anyway. So
no,
they often do a pretty good job of scavenging what they need to produce a decent yield.
And I like to put the oats in. It just works out well in my rotation. That's pretty much it. This was corn last year, and I remember what it was the year before. I'm not sure. Might have been rye.
It was definitely corn last year.
I think it was rye. Oh yeah, it was definitely corn. Yeah, I think it was rye the year before. After the oats, well, it depends. You can put anything in you want. We could put a small grain in again for winter, or I could put a hay crop in.
Now, I've already got the settings on this the same from the last time I ran it. So you can see right down in here, this shaft has these flutes on it. And when I change the calibration, you either get more or less of that. And that's how much agitation the seed gets to be kicked out into the coulters. So that's already set right for the oats the way we want to plant them. So I'm just going to even out the seed a little bit so it's uniform across the box, because it only falls through by gravity at this point. So one side of the box has less seed than the rest, you'll actually run out and miss some lines in the field. So you want to make sure that it's relatively even. And in this 1 acre field, I probably only check once or twice. In a bigger field, especially as you get near the end, you definitely want to come back here and be checking, because you only get one shot. Got to make sure it's done right the first time. We are looking at last fall. So right now we're looking at Eincorn Wheat. This was planted end of last October. It wants to cycle a whole winter and then comes up real strong, like you can see now, real vibrant in the spring. This year's snow cover that lasted for so long was a real benefit to this crop. It helped to protect it from the worst of the winter wind. And all that snow brings a little bit of free nitrogen as well. So as that melts, it's right there in the soil when the sun shines in the spring. And this is, as you can see, has greened up real nice. This field was planted about a week ago. It got 2 passes with the Perfecta, which is a relatively light field cultivator, just the sweeps and a crumbling basket to give it this fine texture. There's a lot of residue on the surface from last year's wheat and einkorn crop that was in this block. It was chopped up fine enough by the flail mower that it wasn't at all a problem for the seed drill. And it's also left me with a lot of good moisture controlling mulch on the surface and good organic matter for the biology in the soil to keep working on. I don't know if we'll be able to see it, but we might be able to pull up a seed and see if after 7 days in cool early March, if we've got anything germinated yet. We did get a rain after the planting. There's a seed that's starting to plump, but no germination yet. So there's a seed that's been in the ground for a week. It's plumped up real nice, and right there, that little white tip at the bottom of it, you can see it's starting to form its first little rootlet. We'll have green shoots coming out of the ground, I would bet, in another week now that we're up in the 60s every day.
So we are at North Slope Farm in South Hunterdon County, and we're looking at our trial greens for NOFA, New Jersey. We've got 4 half-acre trial plots planted. So just thinking about how we got the fields ready for planting. We started, in this case, we started with tillage because I was going into a new field that I hadn't worked in like over a decade, really. It's just been a hay field. So I didn't really, it was thick sod and some bramble roots and stuff like that. So I really didn't know how well it was going to work up. So I chisel plowed it and then rototilled the big clumps so I had fairly level ground. And I want to say that maybe I tilled it surface tilled it one more time before seeding. So after doing the primary tillage and I had a pretty level field and felt comfortable that it was going to work, that's when I went over it with some fertilizer, some certified organic fertilizer, and the pH was pretty good. Otherwise, that would be this. We could have added the lime before tillage or after tillage, either way. And let's see, because the field had been in sod for so long, it hadn't been tilled for so long, I wasn't so worried about putting the compost down because typically the compost is helpful when you're doing a lot of tillage year after year. The compost can really add organic matter and build up biological life, but in this case, it's probably pretty solid since this is the first tillage in a while. Really, it's just a matter of, for us at North Slope Farm to plant these grains, it's really just to keep the process going where we want organic growers to plant small grains. There's definitely a market for it. There's definitely people in the state of New Jersey that want to be able to buy organic grain and use it to make products. It's just something that's not that readily available right now. So New Jersey just wants to have people be able to see it, maybe get inspired, maybe trigger the next questions.
And I don't see much else growing in here besides what you planted.
Right, so this is one of the advantages of the small grain is that you can plant it when a lot of the biology is sort of slowing down and going to sleep. So there's less competition for the weeds when you plant it. And then it holds the space through the winter. And then now it's just really starting to wake up and start to grow. But it's already going to be growing before any of the little summer weeds even germinate. So that's really the beauty of it. It doesn't really strictly even need to be cultivated, which is, controlling weeds for an organic farmer can be difficult. And the small grains definitely do seem to be well suited with careful management to fairly good weed competition.
Great. So Elizabeth, I think we're back over to you.
Yeah, I'm getting going here. So this is where I ended, and I think you heard about a lot of those things that went fast. The farmers you listen to are all New Jersey growers. I think all three of them, correct me if I'm wrong, are what we would say are in pretty much central New Jersey. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's what we would call it. Yeah.
But we already have growers in northern New Jersey, and I have at least one person participating in the project in southern New Jersey. So you can grow these grains all over your state. So I wanted to go through some things wanted to emphasize a couple of things that the farmers said. My connection is unstable, so we'll wait just a second. And then I wanted to give you a bit more information. So when you're first getting into this, is sourcing seed. It should be easy. It's not as easy as it should be. There are two types of seed basically you're going to be dealing with. They're modern varieties, and these are excellent varieties. We know they grow well in New Jersey. They grow well all over the Middle Atlantic states and into New York. And so some examples of these are Warthog winter wheat, Redeemer winter wheat. Those are beautiful bread wheats. Glen spring wheat, which is a fantastic high protein wheat. And then Scott was talking about Gale oats, which is a wonderful hull-less, hairless oats, which really does well in the market. But be careful, because there are many other varieties, modern varieties, and there are some that I don't have listed here, which are very good. But not all of these varieties are known by our processors, by the bakers, by the mills. So before you settle on a modern variety you've grown before, does it sell well? Feel free to contact OGRIN for my 2 cents on it. Another important point about modern varieties is that these are controlled, they're owned by usually a seed company or another entity. And so that means that you need to buy it from the seed company that has permission to sell it. And that's great if you can get it. So the problem is that a lot of all those 4 varieties that I've listed up there, for example, well, 3 of them, Warthog, Glen, and Gale, it's very difficult to buy it directly from the seed company. 2 of them are Canadian varieties, and some of the Canadian seed companies won't sell across the border to us. Some of the seed varieties, for example, that wonderful Glen, used to be sold by Albert Leeds Seed House, which is a wonderful seed house in Minnesota, but they've dropped it. You can still get Glen, but you now have to go into North Dakota. So it gets a little difficult, but it's well worth it. You can still buy Redeemer from the Canadian seed company Snowbellen Farms. And it's well worth it, because then you can get certified seed, and you can see those certified seed tags, US certified seed or Canadian. Now that doesn't mean organically certified. It just means that it's gone through the seed law, seed production, the US seed production process. And so you can be sure when you buy certified seed that it won't have pernicious weed seeds in it, a lot of trash. It's an excellent quality to plant. So whenever possible, you try to get that. And then in some cases, you can also get seed that's organically certified. But remember that all of the seed that I'm talking about now has not been treated with, it's not been treated. Well, you can make sure that you can request untreated seed, and it's not genetically modified. So it will work for organic growers. So what do we do with all these wonderful seed varieties that it's difficult for individual growers to get? Group ordering. If we have to bring in Redeemer and bring it into a central location and then distribute it. OGRIN tries to help farmers do this every single year. Sometimes we even have to go to Alberta, Canada. So if the key is, though, once you decide or you're interested in a particular variety, start looking for it at least 2 months before you're ready to plant. So for example, I start getting calls for spring planting in January, and I'm happy to get them then. If I get calls at the beginning of April, I'm not very happy, because then we're already well behind the 8 ball. It's very difficult to source seed within a 2-week period when you need to plant. So you can find these varieties, but sometimes it takes a little bit of finagling, and OGRIN has been doing this for a long time. I don't take any money for it. It's a service to the community. If you need help finding seed, by all means contact me. Now there's a type of seed. Heirloom, ancient grains, I throw legume seed in here, and VNS types, or variety not specified, is not owned by anyone. So it can be marketed and circulate, it can circulate freely. So let me give you a couple of examples. So Henry Byler, who's an excellent farmer in north central Pennsylvania, bulked several land races of einkorn. Nobody owns them, nobody can own them. And so he's been growing them and bulking them, and now he's selling them as seed, which he sells as clean seed. So you can buy einkorn from Henry Byler quite legally, and he'll be happy to sell it to you. Another example, and this is really great because this is close to you in New Jersey. There's a wonderful seed company, many of you are probably familiar with it, called King's Agricede. They mostly sell forage and cover crop seed, but they sell things like buckwheat. So they'll sell variety not specified buckwheat. You can get it certified organic, and that's wonderful. So, but again, some of this seed is difficult to source. So for example, if you're interested in heirloom wheat seeds, it can be difficult to find them. Again, you can ask around in your farming community. You can also contact OGRIN. I have information up on the website, plus you can just talk to me. And sometimes I can connect you, very often I can connect you with an individual or a farmer not too far away from you that will sell you some of this seed. Before you buy, ask for a germination rate. They should have done a germ test for you and whether the seed has been cleaned. If it hasn't been cleaned, think long and hard before you buy that seed. So again, if you need help, OGRIN can try to connect you with the seed you want. Let's move into rotation. You heard Tom Zhang, who's a very experienced grower, talk about this. One key thing with this type of value-added grains, these small grains, you need to reduce your risk. And one of the major risk reduction strategies is do not plant wheat, rye, barley, einkorn, spelt, emmer before or after each other. They're all triticum species. They're all they're not all triticum species, excuse me. They're all small grain species that are highly susceptible to fusarium, which is a disease that's endemic in our region. It's across a lot of the country to contaminate your seed, which will, if it's too high, the vomitoxin, it does exactly what it says it is, vomitoxin. If it's too high, you can't sell it because it can make people sick. Keep in mind that corn is also another major host of fusarium. What is not, that's still a small grain? Happily, oats. Oats is a minor host. That's why Tom Zhang was saying he could plant almost anything after oats. That's very true. Other things to keep in mind about a rotation, and those of you that have been growing sustainably or organically probably know all this, the key is diversification. So alternate spring, summer, and fall planted crops. I'll be getting to that later on. Alternate grass and broadleaf crops. Alternate feeders, heavy, moderate, light feeders. Densely planted crops like wheat or buckwheat with row crops like corn or soybeans. And then vegetable crops are fantastic to rotate with small grain crops. So because these small grain crops and specialty crops here are so high value, you can rotate them with vegetables and not lose any money and still get the wonderful benefits of planting these soil conserving crops. What are some excellent break crops that work almost anywhere in the rotation? Oats we talked about, and buckwheat is another great one, which you can sell. As I said, it was selling for $4 a pound flour, even in my impoverished area. Okay, quickly on fertilization. I forget who mentioned soil testing. I think it was Mike. This is really key, especially if you're coming out of land that's been in hay or fallow. So it's always surprising to me how many people don't know how to take a soil test. It's not difficult. And there's an excellent how-to sheet from Rutgers. And I would highly recommend getting your test at Rutgers. It's cheap, it's fast, it gives you the basics. The real basics you need are your pH and your organic matter content. That will tell a lot, and then you get your major nutrients, etc. So start with a soil test. And at this point, I always recommend Building Soils for Better Crops. It's a SARE publication. It's fantastic on soil management, and it also helps you to interpret your soil test results. They're coming out with a 4th edition, so it's usually downloadable. You don't even have to buy. So then if your soil test tells you that you're under 6, it'll also tell you to add lime. And again, liming is a pretty cheap fertilizer, and it's also essential to get your best yields, to make sure your nutrient availability is reaching optimum. Just very quickly, I'm going to give you one example of actual fertility requirements for small grain crops in terms of the major nutrients. I've chosen barley. Wheat and oats are not very different. You'll notice that in terms of nitrogen, 29 of phosphorus and potash, 60 of potash, if you remove the straw. Ding, 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 ding. Warning, warning. Removal of straw means removal of fertility and organic matter. And notice that with oat straw, you can remove up to 65 pounds of an acre with potassium. So I really, really strongly urge you to leave the residue on the field. Exception when you're going to use that straw for bedding on your own farm. Then it's fantastic because, of course, all that material is going to come back to your field wonderfully enriched with urine and manure. So I would consider barley, rye, and wheat to be moderate fertility requiring crops. They're all about the same, and oats. Some are much lower fertility requiring crops. For example, in this group, buckwheat and eincorn. Eincorn, as an ancient grain, doesn't require and shouldn't get a lot of nitrogen. It'll fall over at a lot higher fertility requiring crops. If you're going to grow some heirloom corn, for example, or hemp, something like that, you're going to need more fertility. But this just gives you an indication of some guidelines for fertility requirements. And of course, you're going to want to supply your nitrogen with a leguminous nitrogen. I'll show you where you can do that in your planting, your rotation in a few minutes. And then you can also apply, as Mike said, your own compost, although on a field scale, composted chicken manure, things like that. Okay, let's go into seedbed preparation, which all the farmers stressed, which was wonderful because new farmers, this is where they tend to fall down. They don't get the field very well prepared. So there are two situations you're faced with, and they both were featured in the video. In some cases, in many cases, you're going to be planting into a field that's already in production. So there usually only moderate tillage is required. For example, Tom's put on his manure, disked it in, and then he used a field cultivator to prepare the seedbed. Scott used a field cultivator only. And here you can see, I don't know if this is his particular model, but I thought I'd show you a Perfecta field cultivator because he mentioned it. And you can see the sweeps, and then also on the back of the very back, you can see the basket that's doing that nice crumbling action to get a nice seed bed prepared. You can also, and this is often the case for new farmers, be putting a field into production that's been in long-term fallow or has been in hay. This is a different situation totally, and the key is it's going to take some time. It takes time to get the field ready for an annual cash crop. Here's an ideal situation. Plow, remember that Mike chisel plowed. So that's you're going to need some primary tillage to kill the sod. And then you're going to have to wait. You're going to have to wait and let that break down. And then you're going to go after it with probably 2 weeks at least, depends on the weather. You're going to have to go after it with secondary tillage, with a disc, or as Mike did with a rototiller. And Mike didn't do this, but I recommend it. Then I'd plant a cover crop, something pretty tough like buckwheat or oats, or an oat pea crop. Grow that for 6 to 8 weeks, incorporate, wait at least 2 weeks, do a final seedbed prep, and then plant your cash crop. So rule of thumb, it's much easier to get a hay field or a long-term fallow field into production for a summer planted crop or a fall crop than a spring crop. Okay, you have more time and you need that time. Now, one thing that often strikes either field that I just talked about is Canada thistle. And I'm not sure, I think Scott did talk about it. I'm not sure that snippet remained in the video, but Canada thistle is a serious, serious problem in these value-added grain crops. You literally can't grow spring grains in a thistle infested field. They'll come right through. They'll make your crop a mess. And even in fall crops, if your thistle infestation is really severe, it's going to foul your crop. It's going to reduce yield, and it's going to be a mess when you try to clean it. It's sometimes very hard to get rid of the thistle seeds. So what I'm showing you here are is an option for how to control thistle without a lot of tillage. And what really works is a succession of buckwheat cover crops. So here you can see I planted over a patch of thistle. There was thistle on both sides of the photograph, but notice that on one side I planted a buckwheat crop, and on the other I didn't plant anything. And you can see how the buckwheat is doing a pretty good job of suppressing it. Then we'll come in, let that grow for 6 weeks, maybe, the buckwheat. We'll till it, and then we'll plant the buckwheat again. And that has been shown to really suppress the thistle so that you can grow a crop the next year. The other option is to put a sod crop in. Alfalfa is fantastic, but you're going to need to have it well planted so there are no gaps. You're going to need to manage it carefully. For example, you're going to need to mow it, and you should anyway for hay. So that can also reduce your thistle. So thistle is a major, major problem. If you need more help with this, if you have some thistle infested fields, we all do, don't hesitate to get in touch. Okay, so just one more thing on poor ground preparation, because I see this all the time. A poor seed bed means you're going to have a reduced crop stand. You're not going to get good emergence. And if the sod, if you're coming out of a hayfield or a fallow situation, if the sod is not completely killed, you're going to have weed pressure right from the get-go. One great benefit of a fall planted grain is its ability to suppress weeds. And you can see I'm showing you two winter crops. On the left is eincorn and on the right is spelt. And look, this is what a winter grain crop should look like. This is organically managed. Their fall planted crop is very weedy. It's likely that poor ground preparation is at fault. And so we need to think through what you're doing. So planting methods, you saw a lot. You saw a planting drill, a seed drill, a grain drill. Those are wonderful machines. There are even more sophisticated precision planters available. They're usually pretty expensive. You can still get a used drill for a fairly reasonable price. And they're wonderful because they do several things at once. They meter out the seeds so that you're getting the rate near to the rate you want planted. They're spacing it. They're cutting furrows, and then they have some sort of mechanism, if you're lucky, a press wheel, that then presses the furrow together to give you good seed to soil contact. So if you can get a drill, great. I hope you can see my cursor. That's this grass seed box. And that allows you to plant legumes at the same time. You can put your main grain in the main bin, and then at the same time in the same pass, you can plant like red clover or crimson clover over the field. So if you're looking for a grain drill to buy, it's nice if you can get one with a grass seed box. You can also broadcast your seed on. That's perfectly okay. Takes a little more work. You can either use a tractor mounted spin seeder or you can put it on by hand if you need to increase your seeding rate. And then you've got to incorporate the seed. This seed can't lie on the top of the ground. It's not small enough to be worked in just by rain. So you need to incorporate the seed with light tillage, with a harrow, like a spring tooth harrow, a disc, a field cultivator. And then very importantly, you need a third pass with a cultipacker or a roller to get good seed to soil contact. Okay, we're almost done. Nagiso really wanted me to go through the planting calendar because you guys can plant all year long. The spring crops, oats, wheat, barley, emmer, flax, you heard the farmers. You try to get them in as soon as the ground can be worked, and oats need to go in the earliest. For New Jersey, that really means that by April 30th, you should have your spring crops in, and earlier than that, the better. At the same time, when you plant your spring crops, consider interseeding a forage legume. If you can interseed red clover, crimson clover, oh boy, you're going to be all ready for your next crop because the clover is going to thrive with the small grain. One thing to think, you heard Tom say that occasionally he's planting in the first week of May. That he's an experienced farmer. Sometimes you can't help it. But remember that with increased heat comes reduced tillering. And that means, every seed puts up not just one shoot, but 3, 4, and every one of those shoots should have a grain head. So if you have reduced tillering, if you only have 1 shoot or 2 shoots per seed, that's going to affect your yield. With the increased heat, you get increased weed pressure. So if you're at the end of April and you haven't gotten your crop in, seriously consider waiting and planting a different crop. I've featured here spring emmer. You guys can grow that. It's just you see it in its green stage, and then when it's ready to harvest, it's one of the few spring grain crops that's quite weed suppressive. So if you're interested in planting emmer, let me know. It's got a real market potential. Okay, the fall crops, we've talked a lot about them. Barley, wheat, einkorn, rye, spelt. When do you plant them? Well, check with other farmers that are planting these crops that are near you. That's always a good source of information. Or use the Hessian fly free dates. These dates were set to avoid infestation with the Hessian fly. Hilariously, we don't have Hessian fly problems, haven't had for many years, but still they're good dates to follow. So I looked them up for New Jersey. Northern New Jersey, you should plant after September 27th, Central after September 30th, Southern after October 6th. A good rule of thumb, late September and early November. If you can get it in that period, you're usually in pretty good shape. Remember that planting too early, why can't you just plant in early September? Because early planting is associated with increased disease problems, foliar disease problems. Planting too late, you can get a poor stand or you can even have crop failure. Now, if you are forced into a late planting, you can always try top dressing at green up in the spring. What that does it will stimulate tillering. So you may be able to recoup some of your potentially lost option, because here you still have plenty of time to think about getting some of these crops in if you're interested. These I call the summer crops. They like warm soil temperatures. Notice that I say heirloom corn. I really wouldn't plant field corn varieties. I would plant heirloom corn, some of the colored varieties, because there's a real market for cornmeal. But people really like the heirloom corn, and they are tastier. Buckwheat, millet, amaranth, all these crops are possible in your summer. Buckwheat is an interesting one. You can plant that anytime from in your part of the woods, say mid to late May through July. Sometimes recommended that you plant after the 4th of July, so that what you're trying to do then is avoid high temperatures when the buckwheat is flowering, because it can cause some flower abortion and therefore reduce yield. But the problem is, what is the ground condition like in mid-July? It's usually pretty dry. So if you're interested in planting buckwheat, we can discuss what might be a really good planting strategy for you. There is a market for buckwheat. Finally, Nagisa wanted me to talk a little bit about finding equipment. I have a fact sheet on this on my website, but what I like to use is the Lancaster Farming. It's a newspaper that comes out every week of want ads. And it's really great for finding a combine, for finding a grain drill, a seed cleaner, it's field cultivator, et cetera, et cetera. You can also use the web sites, eBay, Craigslist, et cetera. Auctions are wonderful places to buy grain equipment. Again, Lancaster Farming has lots of listings for auctions. You can use your, I don't know if you call them penny savers in New Jersey, your local weekly want ads that are mailed to you or delivered to you. And then there are some grain equipment resellers, for example, commodity traders. What they do is they buy up used equipment and then they sell it to you. Sometimes they refurbish it. Now, it's good in that they often have a lot of equipment. Their prices are going to be much higher than if you bought through a want ad in Lancaster Farming. And then don't neglect the farmer network. That's a great way. You let people know, what do you need? You need a 10-foot drill. You need a combine, a pull behind combine. Let your farming community know, and let OGRIN know if you want, and we can often help. So I'm gonna just open it up for questions and comments. You can contact me through my website or through my email. My phone number is also on the OGRIN website, so don't be shy. I'm still working on this NE SARE project. I'm here to help give you some help. I am an agronomist by training, but I also do quite a bit of help with marketing. So shall we go into some discussion?
Yeah, I've got a question.
Any questions?
I've got a question right off the bat, Elizabeth. Can you hear me all right?
Yep.
This is Mike from North Slope Farm.
Yes.
So we've got 4 half-acre plots of small grains planted in demonstration plots for NOFA to just learn about it and to give people a place to come check it out. And one of the things that I have to figure out is our rotation. So I was very interested in your comments about the break crops. So like the planting the buckwheat. I'm just looking at my notes here. What was the other, or oats between? So, and one thing I wondered about, I know you're talking about grains that are valuable for marketing, but I wondered about sorghum Sudan grass as a break crop. Would that work for like a green manure crop after harvesting?
Yeah, I would prefer that it was not a grass crop,
I see.
or not only a grass crop. Going by the rules of rotation is okay in terms of being a fusarium host, but a lot of the grasses share the same diseases. So, you know, the other thing to think about is, just because you're a vegetable grower, what I would do is I'd put vegetables in a half acre, if that works for you.
Right.
And I don't, you know, I don't think you need to leave a fallow, especially if you and I didn't mention this, so I'm very apologize for this. What you can do with a winter planted grain is in February, just go over it, spin on some red clover. And then when you harvest off your winter wheat or your winter spelt, you just let that clover go, and man, you're ready for the next season. So I think you can rotate right into vegetables. You could also go into dry beans, anything like that. But yeah, sorghum Sudan would work in this case because it's going to be less of a host of some of the other grass diseases to these particular crops. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, and just to follow up a little bit, so like, so say I harvest my small grain in July or something like that. Then I want to get something else planted. Say I didn't, I'll ask about the clover, but for the moment, imagine I didn't get the clover established. So I want to break, so I'm going to till the field and get buckwheat planted.
Or you could do an oat pea.
Planting in the summertime.
Well, yeah, you could wait a little bit. You could leave the residue on, and buckwheat would be fine as a cover. Absolutely.
And then the buckwheat wouldn't protect me through the winter, right? So would I try to get another small grain planted to go through the winter?
Yeah, now it's interesting, folks, because what he has 4 different plots. Correct me if I'm wrong. You have a winter wheat, which I think is red 5, correct? Yeah. Which is an heirloom. That's fantastic. You have einkorn, you have spelt, and you also have what else do you have? Rye.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the rye and the spelt are going to come off relatively early. And the wheat the same. The einkorn is going to take probably 2 to 3 weeks longer. So the ones that come off early, I'd put them right into buckwheat and then follow it with an oat pea crop or something like that. You're going to probably want to put some legume in to get ready if you do want to put it into like a vegetable production or another cash crop the following year. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm really thinking not because the small grains, I'm not going to plant that many acres of vegetables in that space, and so and also NOFA right now is working with trying to help the Division of Fish and Wildlife come up with plans for farmland that they are trying to get active in organic management practices. Mm-hmm. So thinking about coming up with sort of a rotation of these grains that we could recommend for people. Mm-hmm. So what I'm struggling with is, all right, I've got the small grain, I plant it in the fall, it grows, it protects the soil through the winter, comes on real good in the spring, I'm going to harvest it that summer. It seems like one really good option is, you've said, you get the clover established with it. So you cut the small grain off, the clover is established, and then the clover would be beneficial for soil health. It might be useful for pasture. It might be something that you could cut for hay, but you could also let it just go fallow really right through the winter, right? And
exactly. Yeah, that's one of the great benefits. One of the few intercrops that Western civilization came up with compared to our friends in other parts of the world is the forage legume small grain intercrop. They really work together beautifully. The legume doesn't bother the small grain. It almost never affects the yield, and if it does, it's like a 5% reduction. And in exchange, you get a free niche in your rotation to grow a soil improving crop. So it's always when you're planting a spring grain, you should interseed a forage legume if it's at all possible, because again, it's a perfect intercrop for our climatic conditions.
Elizabeth, Rob is putting in the chat that clover gets hit hard by deer in our area without a fence. So what is an alternative to clover?
Well, there is no alternative to clover. In organic rotations, you've got to have it somewhere in the rotation.
Mhm.
So remember that the great thing, let's say you frost seed it in February into your winter grain, or you plant it with your spring grain, it's going to be doing its job for at least several months without getting munched. Okay.
Okay.
You know, there are other possibilities. You can put on a winter you can put on a fall planted cover or a late summer planted cover of oats and peas. You know, anything is susceptible to grazing, but you know, I mean, anything, if they're eating the clover, they're going to eat all the other crops as well. But there is no substitute. Clover has to be a forage legume, and I mean, it can be alfalfa. I mean, alfalfa is the queen of legumes. And then you can also have pulse crops. That's why it's important to think of these grains as you cannot just have a grain rotation. You have to have broadleaf crops in there. And buckwheat is a broadleaf, amaranth is a broadleaf, flax is a broadleaf. But really, you need to put some of those pulses in whenever you can too. And so dry beans are a great, potatoes are fantastic. You can do a 2-year rotation forever with potatoes and a small grain. So you can't think of it as just small grains. Like any other rotation that works for over the long term, it has to be diversified. Can you have 4 out of 6 years in small grains? Yeah, but you can't have 6 out of 6.
I think Linda Hampton had another question. I think you might have sort of answered this, but let's just ask the question anyway. When do you recommend planting buckwheat in central Jersey? And what is the minimal acreage needed for a good cash yield? What about amaranth? Is it similar to buckwheat?
Yeah, amaranth you can plant as soon as the ground reaches 50 degrees and you're frost free. And amaranth is a lot easier to grow than it's going to produce seed for you. And if you're interested in planting amaranth, please get in touch with me. I love amaranth. Keep in mind, the amaranth is going to grow like topsy, but and it'll yield well. The problem with amaranth is market. Now in New Jersey and with the huge metro areas near you, I think you could develop a market for amaranth. Buckwheat, I'm going to say that what I suggest is, because you have such hot summers, trying a mid-July planting. Or if you're experimenting with buckwheat, what you might want to do is split your field and plant half of it, say at the beginning of June, and then half of it in mid-July. We want to see how it does. I think it could do just fine at the end of May, early June, because that's when I planted it in Minnesota and I got fantastic yields. And Minnesota has a continental climate, meaning my summers were just as hot as yours. So I would get in touch with me and we can discuss this a little bit more, but you can grow buckwheat.
Okay, Linda, I hope, did that answer all your questions? You might be on mute. Well, let's assume they did. We answered her questions. How about anyone else? Don't forget to unmute if you're asking a question.
Yes, that answered my question. I'm sorry, I didn't unmute. This is Linda.
Okay.
So I'll contact you, Elizabeth, because I wanted
Great.
to ask a little bit more about the amaranth. Okay.
Yep. Oh, if you're interested in amaranth, I'm interested in you.
Okay, great.
I'd be interested to hear,
Okay.
Linda, whatever question you have about it. I think the amaranth is not something that people know a lot about. Let's talk about it a little bit.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I'm thinking the amaranth is kind of like red-rooted pigweed, or no, wait, it's
Yes, it's
green
closely
pigweed,
related.
right?
It's closely related to red root pigweed. And I should have put, I did some demonstrations here on my farm with Amaranth and various varieties. You know, you can grow it for its leaves, but you can also grow it for its grain. And it produces seed that's slightly larger than red root pigweed seed. So, you know, there are opportunities to include it in cereal mixes and also to make some products with it. What comes to mind is using it in health bars and things like that. But Amaranth, like buckwheat, has suffered from our inability to be creative in developing products. And so, but what we, you know, it's hard to develop a product and hard to develop a market if you're not growing any. But what I do know is that you can grow it, that it will yield very well for you. And, you know, it's a little dab will do you. A field, the planting rate, because the seed is so tiny, that's one you can easily broadcast and just cultipack, and you're good to go.
Is it expensive seed? Is it you?
Well, it given how little you need, it's not terribly expensive. The problem is that it's not, you have to search it out. Can I put my hands on 5 pounds of amaranth seed? Yes, but you know, it's not usually they're selling it in, you know, 1 ounce packets. Yeah. Because it really it hasn't found a market niche yet. So that's, you'd be on the front line growing amaranth, but now's the time, because with the local and regional food movement, there are going to be people already looking for amaranth, or will be happy to stumble across it, and we can push the envelope. Now, would I suggest that you plant 20 acres of it? No. No, I'd start with an acre or maybe 2. With buckwheat, somebody asked the question about how much buckwheat do you have to grow to make it commercially viable. You know, it depends on how you want to market it. If you want to market retail or semi-retail, then an acre is fine. If you want to sell in larger quantity, then 5 acres would probably, I wouldn't do more than that at a time until you develop your market.
The amaranth, is it hard to harvest? Like, is it require specialized equipment?
No, I think an all crop would handle it. You know, some of it gets really tall. I based this on my experiment. I ran an organic experiment station for the University of Minnesota when I was in Minnesota, and I planted an amaranth crop right by the road. And I'll tell you, the farmers were lined up and down the road watching us harvest that crop. They were so interested. So yes, you know, you're going to have to adjust your combine and so forth. But yeah, you can harvest it. It's not like hemp, you know, which is much more difficult to harvest. Still can be done, but
Yeah, I'm curious about it as a green manure break crop. So even if it wasn't being grown as a grain to harvest for sale, if the seed was fairly inexpensive and it was a vigorous grower, then it seems like you know, encouraging a green manure crop as a break crop between the small grains might be useful.
yeah, what you have to worry about is the fact that what is going to grow well in red root pigweed if you grow it, you know, over a rotation several times. Red root pigweed. It's the same. It has the same. So you have to be a little careful there. Plus, you probably would get a bit of a weed pressure from the amaranth. That could be avoided if you do clever tillage and management. Yeah, my point is always, why grow a cash crop as a cover crop? Because I want farmers to make lots of money, as much money. Let's put it this way. I want them to be as profitable as possible, given that, as we know, it's not easy to even be profitable. But yeah, all of these can be, a lot of these, you know, buckwheat, rye, they're usually grown as cover crops. I do not recommend that if you're serious about value-added grain production, because you're just putting too much stress on the rotation for something that's not giving you any profit. Sorghum Sudan grass, some of the things you mentioned, that's fine. But I would if you're into growing value-added grains, I would not grow a fall rye cover crop. It's just more risk for fusarium, which after all stays in the soil. It stays in crop debris in the soil. That's how it spreads.
So Elizabeth, I don't know if you noticed, but Len has joined us.
Yes. Hi.
Hey Len, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Good. So what did you plant this spring?
So this summer, we'll be harvesting. Well, Ruthie Peretti of Ruthie Peretti's farm in Marksboro, New Jersey. She just planted 5 acres of Glen spring wheat, and that'll be harvested in July, along with her 4.5 acres of warthog winter wheat. We'll also be harvesting from Coldbrook Farm, the landowners there, Jason and Deb Del Salvo and their farmer. We'll have 5 acres of einkorn and 5 acres of Danko rye.
And
So
I
very
think
excited.
at least one person you're going to be working with this summer is going to plant buckwheat, right, Lenny?
Yes, that's correct. I believe that's not too far from Coldbrook Farm in Oldwood, New Jersey, and they plan to plant the buckwheat in May. So great progress all around. Very exciting.
Yeah, and one thing I would be remiss in not mentioning, probably Nagisa was going to, we have other webinars that cover combining and then processing and marketing that we urge you to take a look at. And remember that we already have the processing equipment that we need for small scale production in place. You can get your hands on pretty cheaply processing equipment to make these. So for example, the hulled wheats like spelt and einkorn and emmer, when you combine them, they're still in the hull, most of them, but now we've solved that problem. We do have little dehullers that you can use and we have small mills that you can use to grind your own flour if, for example, you want to retail flour. So the situation has changed from 10 years ago, say, when we were pretty down on our luck in terms of not having. Do we still need more small scale equipment availability? Absolutely. We need newer combines. You can buy used combines. A lot of them are old. If you need a combine, again, get in touch with me. I can give you some help finding one.
All right. Any other questions? No? Okay, well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for dialing in and sharing your knowledge and coaching us on the videos. And it's been really an amazing experience working with you. So thank you so much for everything you've done.
No, thank NOFA New Jersey and all the wonderful farmers in New Jersey. It's been a joy to work with you. So I hope we can keep in touch. Thanks a lot.
For
Thank
sure.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us tonight.
Thanks again.
Thanks for dialing in.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
Good night. Have a great night, everybody.